Um, so I will start by introducing myself. My name is Zawadi. I am an artist based in South Africa. I'm also an activist. I co-founded the Queer Republic with Mary Lee Buba. They are also joining the call with us this morning. Hi, B. And yes, so this session is one of the few sessions we've had on making Africa great for Africans and more importantly for queers. So I'm glad that we got to be able to speak to you, Kwezi, today. Um, so before like talking too many things at once, can you please introduce yourself, tell us about you and the work that you do?
Right. Well, my name is Kwezi, as you said. South African, academic. I suppose you could say artist in many ways. I think we all artists, it's just a matter of if you're pursuing or exploring that side of yourself or not. Um,
Mm.
and as far as just simply introducing myself, I would just say the context of our conversation, I'm a sociologist. I'm an academic and a critical thinker. And a lecturer, the researcher, just generally that's what I do, I suppose. But I'm quiz African brother.
Okay. Pleasure to meet you, Kwezi. So how would you describe African identity pre-colonization?
Pre-colonization African identity. Wow. Well, there's right when you talk pre-colonization, I suppose there's two types. There's a particular time, I guess. Are you talking about pre-colonization before the Berlin Conference, when we actually officially colonized, where there was a bunch of Europeans taking pieces of Africa for themselves? Or are we talking about pre-colonization, or are we talking about rather pre-European contacts, right? Before we really were engaging with Europeans, before they were Europeans, on African soil. So in the context of South Africa, for instance, you'd be talking about Africa before 1652, so before the Jan van Riebeeck voyage that lands them at the Cape, or are we talking about the 1800s? You know what I mean? So with that being said, you would have to, one, I guess for in this case, clear that up for me. But I suppose, I believe you're talking about the Africa before really this European, you know, contact. So the Africa prior European, contact. So there's two ways to look at that even. There wasn't Africa. I would argue there wasn't Africa before Europe. So we didn't see the continent as one, right? So there wasn't this continental consciousness where we say, I am African, I am Black type of conversation before the European consciousness that we gained after that, right? And prior to that, you would have been
Mm.
speaking about an African or an Africa or a continent that was shaped or made up of nations as opposed to countries, right? So it was going to be the Zulu nation, the Yoruba nation, etc. And people, even prior to that, would be speaking about, the Kush dynasty and empire, the Kemet or Kamiti dynasty or empire, and spaces of like that, right? So we'd speak about these generations of empires that have come to be. And there's ways to look at that, right? Um, there would have been an identity that was quite particular to those people. Perhaps another way to put it, you'd say there would have been a Tswana identity as opposed to a South African identity. There would have been a Zulu identity as opposed to, a South African identity, if you get what I'm saying here. So there wouldn't have been an African consciousness in the way that we're thinking about it today, right? And that's um,
Mm.
the first thing I would say. So essentially, then, how we understand ourselves, how we identify, ourselves would have been through those lenses of the immediate spaces that we would have belonged to, right? And then based on that, the identity would have been quite different. Certain spaces would have shaped you in a different way. The kind of background and the kind of knowledge and kind of socialization and things like that, the kind of way you would have been nurtured essentially would have been different to what another space would have done, right? So what does that mean? It means what identity means, I don't know, to a Zulu would be totally different, or how a Zulu identifies themselves would be totally different to how, somebody, you know, an Igbo or Yoruba person would identify themselves. So we would start there. And then that would be based on where they're coming from, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm telling you something there, but I guess I would say there would be no sense of an African identity, or there would be a fluidity of what the nations within Africa would have identified or considered their identity, and also individuals, of course, based on that, right?
Mm.
Does that
I
kind
hear
of
you.
answer
I
you?
hear you.
Oh, I mean, you said something about queerness. Let's maybe take it a bit just to shape what I'm saying a bit clearer. So if you speak about queerness, or I don't know, like identifying yourself as queer as a type of identity, right? Now, first and foremost, that is a modern way of identification in the sense that there wasn't such an identity in itself back in a certain Africa, right? There were queer people,
Mm.
right? There would have maybe been people who live a certain life, who, you know what I mean, but not necessarily an identity as what we're saying today. Even how that would have been perceived would have been quite specific to which group of people you were talking about, right? As I said, there wasn't a continental consensus of this is how we are as African. The Zulus would have thought this, those people there would have thought that, the Xhosas would have thought this about themselves and about what it means to be, a person, essentially, what it means to be a good person or a bad person. You know what I'm saying?
Mm. So basically, it's like we, how identity would have been in the African context would be more grouped, like communal than separate. I don't know if I'm hearing you correctly, because now, when you also mention the queerness and how it wouldn't be separate from other aspects of a person compared to the modern way of how we see identity. Um, so would you say that it would be more of like a grouped feature of who a person is compared to like separation of gender, of sexuality, of race, and all of those
Mhm.
things?
Right. So, I mean, you take the typical four pillars of identity or identification, right? In the African continents, typically those would have been probably four main questions you probably would have been asked, né? Um, and those questions would have been something like, who are you? Oh, my name is Zawadi. You explain your last name, whatever. And then the question would have been, what is your clan, or what is your clan name? So you'd say maybe
Mm,
your clan name, and you start naming that clan, and then they would say, okay, where are you from? So typically what that means, which region are you from, which mountains, which area, essentially, which, you point, no,
mhm,
that section there. Oh, who's the king there? No, it's king,
mm,
whoever the name of the king or the queen or the rulers of the space essentially are. So that's who you are. We don't get into, oh, what's your race? Oh, who's your god? Typically those things are already explained there in just saying who you are. Oh, my name is John. Oh, well, it wouldn't have been John then. But you get the point. My name is this person. Where are you from? Or what's your clan? This is my clan. These are my so-called people, or my ancestry, heritage, or lineage would be this clan. Where's those people from? Oh, they from that region there, over that mountain, around those rivers over there. Oh, who's the king or the chief over there? Oh, it's chief so and so. Oh, okay, I see those people. You know what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden, there you are.
mm,
Nowadays, identity and the world and how it's shaped itself pretty much is towards, as people would argue, various, much a subjective type of world. So people want to live their individual lives. We have this thing now, this thing of saying, this is who I am, this is how I want to be. You know what I'm saying? So what comes first typically to a person
mm,
today is the person themselves. So the typical agency of the person or the personal concerns, as somebody like Margaret Archer would argue. All of us have our personal concerns and our life projects, right? As a person, we all have our projects. Your life is a project that you want to fulfill. So you shape your life, you create goals, you
Mm.
create things that you want to see happening. This is what I call success. This is what I call I have made it. This is what I call failure. This is what I want to achieve. This is the path I'm going to take to achieve that. There's a project that you're planning. And then you want to fulfill your project, like a typical assignment. And then you want to, at the end of it, pass or fail your project. I mean, obviously, you don't want to fail it. And then in thinking about that project, you place first and foremost your own concerns. So then your concerns shape what you want to see happening and how you want to go about living your life, typically today. So, the postmodern scholars want to argue that because we've stemmed away from, or because we're moving, in fact, away from the world as we know it to the world as it seems like it's becoming, if you want to put it that way, um, identity itself is not linked to those four pillars I just put there. In fact, we reject those four pillars hectically today. In fact, identity today or identification, how we want to make sense of ourselves, is typically like a supermarket, you walk into the door, you grab a basket, and you just shop for the pieces that come together to make you the happy you that you want to be. So people choose to speak a certain language, they choose to dress a certain way, they choose to eat a certain type of food. Maybe your people, let's say your people are the Tswana people, and when you spoke about those four pillars, you mentioned certain mountains and the people over there. Because when you say that my people are from that region, what already you're saying is my people probably eat food from that region. My people probably, you know what I mean? Unless we're trading, in fact, we were trading and sharing and bartering, whatever you want to call it. But typically, if my people are close to the ocean or in the region there by the rivers and stuff like that, you can imagine that fish then might be something that my people eat. Making an example here, like a wild one. But the point I'm making is nowadays, and then maybe you'd say the people over there grow their hair like this and they have these kind of piercings and this body modification that they do. And it's called cultural stuff. This is how the people there do their earrings. And the people on that side use beads and these kind of things when they do this and that. You know what I'm saying? Nowadays, you just go grab a little bit of Tswana-ness there, grab a little bit of, I don't know, Shona-ness from Zimbabwe, grab a little bit of Mozambicanness. Take a little bit of anything you want, really. Grab a little bit of Europeanness and Americanness, grab a little bit of whatever the hell makes sense to you to create this, what we call individual identity. Rather, the myth that we understand is the individual identity, because there's no such thing as the person to themselves as themselves, right? So you can't have an individual identity. Everything you are is because of the social. What you call yourself is because of what is around you and what you've seen and what you've been taught and what you've accepted and rejected. Then you've put together, as I say, the supermarket type of style of shopping for the parts that you like. And then you create the best and then you pay for it and then you walk out and you dress like that. I don't know. Is that even saying anything to you? So yeah, you're talking about now a modern, like what I first tried to explain then is how Africa would have looked, right? Before Europeans wouldn't have had this idea of saying we are Africans, we are Black people. We would have said we are these people from that clan, from that region under this king, right? And then today we've transcended that because obviously of European colonialism. Where that comes in is that what it did is, first and foremost, if you're talking about pure colonialism now, when they started to say, okay, we are going to Africa, they've just had the Berlin conference in Germany. They've decided this is what we're doing. Britain, you guys grab a bit of, what did Britain grab? South Africa, the southern regions essentially, right? South Africa, Zimbabwe, what today is Zimbabwe, what today is South Africa essentially. Germans took what then was called Southwest Africa, what we call Namibia today. I think the British also took something like a place like Kenya. They took a space in Nigeria. Then the French took a bit of Nigeria, right? Yeah, so there's French-speaking Nigerians. Then the French also took a bit of what Cameroon. Then the English took a bit of Cameroon. And then it was just mayhem, right? And then they went to India. They did whatever they did in Asia. whatever. So they had this fun, if you want to call it that, fun going out there snatching little pieces of Africa. So in doing that, what they did then is, because they've decided that this section is Britain, that section there is also Britain, that part of Africa over there is also Britain, they drew lines, as we all say, right? This is now high school history. They drew lines, then they said, okay, this is my country, that's my country. And then we have countries as we understand them today. So those countries are shaped by what? How do you know you belong to which country? Well, based on the passport or ID you carry. So when you carry this kind of passport, that's who you are. Now, to those four pillars start disappearing. What starts making you the you that you know now is the passport. Now, we start with the passport. Who are you? Well, here's my passport. That already determines who you are in the world, right? That's why we say certain passports have certain power and certain passports don't. Certain passports don't get a visa. You go apply for a visa, you have a certain passport. They say, no, we're not taking people from that country. You guys want to come live here forever, or whatever the case might be, but we don't want people from your country. And then people from other countries, you know what I mean? Passports then have that weight, and we start talking like that. And then now there's a new you that emerges. There's the you in a context of South Africa, right? So you can still say, no, I'm Tswana, no, my king would have been, if you even know that that even means nowadays. Now you're talking about my president is president whoever, right? My region in South Africa is in the northwest. And then you get into that. And then now your whole self or type of identity you're talking about has shifted away from your nation, as it were, right? Your Tswana-ness, if you want, towards your nationality. So now you become a South African over a Tswana. Your Tswana-ness actually cannot oversee or supersede your South Africanness, because your South Africanness is official. It's got an ID book. It's under the supreme constitution of the country. Your Tswana-ness can't get you out of that. Your South Africanness might be able to, though, right? Your Tswana-ness doesn't travel, you would argue, to Kenya. But your South Africanness takes you to Kenya. Of course, your Tswana-ness travels because you are there. So Tswana, yeah, you know what I mean? Botswana now all of a sudden in Kenya, and Tswana-ness, we start experiencing it in Kenya. So that what you want to call it, that culture, if you want to use that word, right? And people who identify with that culture find themselves in Kenya. But now what happens is they start mixing with people in Kenya, right? They start having a bit of Kenya, that supermarket conversation. They start now mixing, and that's typical. That is just how the world works. You go to a region, you mix with people, you learn their language, you become part, maybe even marry some people there, you give birth to children who only know that. So that's the kind of, first and foremost, Africa we had at some point, and that's the Africa we're grappling with right now. The borders and the identification, identifying of people. So what's the problem with identity, right? It's the category that we have to place you in, or the category that you choose to be placed in. This is who you want to be, or this is where we place you based on what we want you to be, right? So there's a clash there in itself. So for me to say, or for you, I don't know, for you to say you're speaking to a man or vice versa, we start have to create a category called a man, and then create the rules or definitions or things that distinguish what that is. And then by saying so and so is a man, without even knowing them, without even seeing them, with not even hearing their voice, just saying the word a man or a woman, or I don't know, tall or short or pretty, or whatever these little categories we create to identify somebody. You know what I mean? These little boxes, if you want. By saying that about someone, before I even see them, you think that you kind of know who they are. Then you group those little pieces of information you have. So you're talking about a man, okay, who is Black, okay, who is South African, okay, who is, I don't know, Tswana speaking, okay, who is a Muslim, okay, who, you understand what I'm saying? Now, all of a sudden, you think you know this person because you got these pieces of information and what each piece of information says to you. And vice versa, this might be that person's point of identification. This is how they know themselves too. I am a man who is a Christian, who is a Kenyan, who is, you know what I mean, who's Black. And all of these things mean something. They all mean, when you say Kenyan, you mean something. Black, you mean something. Man, you mean something, right? And then in now trying to understand each other, ourselves that way, we trap ourselves. And at the same time, we also we could argue, liberate ourselves. Some people would say, now I know who I am. But I don't know if you could argue that, though. You could argue for liberation or for entrapment. I don't know how you could argue for either. I just know, it breeds that at the end of it. I don't know if I'm making sense.
You are. I want to touch on the nationality part, ID numbers. Also
Right.
reflecting on how these IDs were created because when they started for the South African context, they had to carry black people had to carry dompas, and
Right.
only Europeans had IDs. And now, if you went on the street and you didn't have this book, this dompas, you would be punished. You would be
Mhm.
like brutalized and all of these horrible things done to you. So now, fast forward to the current day and age, we have IDs. It's like a normal thing. It's what identifies you as a human being, basically. If you
Right.
don't have an ID in this day and age, for example,
Mhm.
how how is that like someone doesn't even see you as a human being because you
Mhm.
don't have access to anything in the system because this is what makes you be visible in institutions. You go to school, they need you to have an ID. You go from school, I'm stating here from primary level,
Right.
primary, finish high school, go to varsity, and your ID is needed. You go to a police station, you need help, they will need your ID. You go to a clinic, they need your ID. And for me, the thing about it is that from how it started as a form of an object that oppresses us to now it still being something that we need in order to access like basic needs. And
Right. Right.
if you don't have that ID, say for example
Mhm.
you don't have it, then it seems like you are not a person. It's like you are a ghost in some sort. So when we look at it, is it a thing of we have gained freedom, or it's another way of saying you are still oppressed, but then we make it modern, we modernize it, we make it look nice for you, you know, to be
Right.
able to need this thing to go wherever you want to go. But then if you don't have it, just like back in the days with the Dompas, if you didn't have it, then you will be punished. So now, if you don't have an ID, you don't have access to a lot of basic needs and a lot of things that you would want to get access to, institutions and whatnot. So I just want to like hear your take on that in terms of that. Like, have we really achieved the freedom, or this is the same method of oppression, but it's just modernized. Make it seem like we actually need this.
Is this now the ID you're asking about? That like ID versus a Donbass, for instance?
Yes, the ID. Because I think
Yeah.
it's more or less the same because it started with the Donbass and then it
No,
just
no,
converted
no
into
doubt.
the ID.
Mm. Well, huh. Let me see. I think okay, okay, no, I'm just trying to make sense of it quickly. Okay, let's say this. Well, in the case of South Africa and the Donbass, right? So you're talking about now, is that Population Registration Act 1950? If I'm not just somewhere around there, I think the registration of the population. So the word alone should tell you the term, the name of the act. I mean, population or people's population. Populations Registration Act 1950, around there. Registration is the term. Registration, and then you think about registering somebody or placing somebody within a registry, or knowing who you are in the list. We all know it from going to school. You are part of the class list. And sometimes the teacher would check, even here, you look at the chats. Sometimes you look at who's there, who's registered to be part of the conversation. You look through the chat, the list of participants, I meant to say. So what is the significance of it? Well, look at the Dompas literally in the same way as you look at a passport, because that's essentially what it was. It was a passport. Just like a Zimbabwean needs a passport to get into Botswana, or, you know, that kind of thing. Get into another country, you need to have a passport of your own country. And then the ID itself is the same thing, but of your own nation. So a Kenyan citizen would have a Kenyan identity document or identity card, whatever they carry. Um, and that's, as I said, a Kenyan citizen. So now to identify you in the list of citizens of South Africa, we need to have you in the system. So we need an ID number. So you are South African number, 1,155, and they say your ID number, and then they know where you are based on, you know, where we place you in the system. All those numbers just aren't even your name. In fact, those numbers translate to your name, and somebody reads that and they press enter. Those numbers that make your ID number, by the way, or your passport, and they write that and they read it out and they press enter on the keyboard. All of this information all of a sudden comes out. Oh, that's how she looks. Oh, that's where she went to school. Oh, that's how her fingerprints look. Oh, it's a she. All of these little things, right? We know all of this all of a sudden about you by pressing those numbers. And so therefore we registered you onto the system. Now, if you're not registered on the system, you're not part of the system. Literally, it's that. But now you might be within the borders of the system. In this case, we're talking about the nation called South Africa, for example. You're not, you don't have an ID that says you are a citizen. That means you don't claim rights to, let's say, the school system. Things you mentioned right now. You don't have rights. You can't claim. You can't even say, I am so and so. I want to go to school here. Okay, what's your ID number so we can place you on the system, right? So we know that you are, so we can write things about you. Oh, she is registered for this degree. Oh, she is in Mr. So and so, Dr. So and so, whatever this class. She is doing, you know what I'm saying? She's attending these classes. She owes the university this much. Or she's passed, she needs a degree, right? But just by pressing a bunch of numbers on the system. And as I said, it was the Registration Act. So without that, we don't know who you are. Now, why do we even have this stuff, right? Now, this shit comes from the fact that we actually created countries, right? So what I was talking about now with the scramble for Africa, the Berlin Conference, and the creation of actual countries, which is what happened elsewhere in the world when nations were actually established, right? Prior to when nations, I mean like nation states, like countries now. When those were established, some would argue it was around Westphalian Treaty. When was that? 16 something. Um, Let me think. You know, when I hate missing a date in my mind because then my mind wants to remember it. No, 1648. Yeah. So 1648. This is following the treaty that was signed in Augsburg. This is prior to Jan van Riebeeck ever coming to South Africa, right? So this is prior to us having something we can refer to as a nation. Like this is 1648 for crying out loud. So we have this thing, or the Europeans have this thing in Germany, somewhere, a place called Westphalia, North Germany, Northwest Germany, somewhere there. They make a big decision about what a country is, what sovereignty means. I mean, now this is debated, right, in political sciences and just general scholars who like this kind of conversation are still debating some of these things. So don't quote me as it is a fact. However, the scholars are debating this as the fact that in the Westphalian conference where we signed these treaties, where we established what we call a nation. So we started defining what makes up a country and how to shape what, you know what I mean? What is a country? What is not a country? What is a sovereign country? Etc. Etc. That resulted later on into us going out there. By us, I mean these Europeans who decided to go out there and, you know, essentially colonized spaces. I mean, the story goes on. I'm really skipping lots of phases to avoid giving a whole lecture on the stuff. But the point is, from Westphalia, we fast forward all the way to 1800s, late 1880 something, and the Berlin Conference happened, where the exercise of what happened already in Westphalia in 1648 was continuing, and that was part of that project was colonialism, right? So to show that you are a sovereign nation, went go out there and show us you're a sovereign nation. Grab yourself a piece of cake out there in the world, right? So at this stage with the Berlin Conference, Africa was that giant cake that they just discovered, inverted commas, just discovered this chunk of cake here, guys. Let's get in there and get busy. So they went and did their thing. So they created countries. Now we had to define what a country is. So our country is called Kenya. Our country is called South Africa. This is what makes Kenya Kenya. These are the rules. In other words, these are the laws. This is the constitution. This is the national anthem. This is the flag. Ooh, I love these parts of national anthems and flags. This is the official language. Oh, cool things are coming in. This is what a Kenyan person is. This is what a Kenyan person is not. How do you know? Give them a number. Take a number. Now, as people, you want the number, right? You and right now we can say, no, this is trapping us. Of course it is trapping us. It's trapping you in a country. It's trapping you into identity or nationality. All of a sudden, this is who you are. You're a South African, like it or not, right? So, but now you need to live in this country. You need to get a job. You need to just survive in capitalist society, in capitalist Africa. You need to survive. How are you going to do that without being part of the system? Because the system is where that's where the party is. Now, the problem with this, probably when Azawadi, is the fact that when these lines were drawn, right, it created countries, and in the creation of countries, it separated what we called nations back in our time before this kind of shit happened. So what does that mean? It means now you're going to find people who are called the Ndebele living in, let's say, Zimbabwe, in Bulawayo. They are all of a sudden Zimbabweans. Prior to this, they would have not called themselves this. And before this happened to them, just like now in the current research that I'm doing on immigration and African identity, you find a lot of Ndebele people who tell you, but we should be living in South Africa. Those are our people. Because there's another portion of Ndebele people living in South Africa. And then Ndebele are actually an offshoot, if you want to use the word offshoot. So I'm using offshoot very carefully. They're an offshoot of the Zulu people, right? Now you have two groups of people living in two different countries, both having two different passports, but technically both having the same king in how we understood our society in Africa. But now these people can't afford to not follow the so-called legislation of Zimbabwe and South Africa. In other words, they can't choose to not have passports and identities, because identity documents or cards, because that means they can't access Zimbabwe's opportunities, if I can use that word loosely as well. So they trapped in that predicament. They have no choice. And if you want to be a stateless person, in other words, an undocumented person, then you have all sorts of political problems, right? I don't know. But where do I stand with the identity and identification document thing? I think, to say the least or the most, if you're making it a political conversation, then you can't do without it. If you're going to make it a political power conversation, then you'd say certain passports have more power than others, and belonging to a certain country with a certain type of passport puts you in a certain position or limits you in terms of what you can even become in the world, right? By being a South African, you think you're more privileged than a Malawian by virtue of your passport. An American is better than a Malawian by virtue of the passport. An American is better than a South African, but a South African at least is better than a Ethiopian. Then you're trapped in that belief system. Then people come to South Africa and you say, yeah, just go back home. Go back home. You're taking our stuff. We're better than you. Why must you come here? Then now we have an identity crisis. Now we're having an identity fight. Who belongs? Who doesn't? Who can identify as a member of South Africa? Well, it's the guy without this kind of passport or without this kind of identity. So go home. Now we're trapped there. And that has its own repercussions, what I just said, now political power and the results thereof, right? Then it's symbolic power, then it's symbolic violence into actual physical violence, into what we could even call just simply xenophobia or racism in some contexts. Afrophobia, all these cool words that people like. But that's all based on just which passport has which power. But can you do without it? So you have two types of people. You have citizens of a country. You have stateless people, undocumented people running around in that country. And those, why they stateless is that even in their own country, there might not an ID there. And then there's undocumented migrants. Then there's documented migrants. So there's three types of people: stateless people, migrants, and citizens, based on that ID number. You're always going to be either one of those based on that ID number.
Yeah. So
And based on where you are.
So can we imagine ourselves getting out of this trap? Because like you mentioned, that we are trapped because we do need these documents in order to get access to the things that we need. but do we imagine ourselves like not being in this trap anymore? Like, can we see that? Can we see
We
it
can't.
somewhere, somehow?
It won't happen. It cannot. I'm not saying we can't see it. It's impossible to see. It's impossible to actually let, if it were even trying to become, we would have to actually stop it. You know what I mean? Because what that actually means is that we have to first and foremost dissolve what we call countries. So you would have to cancel the idea of there is a country called South Africa. You'd have to cancel the idea of there's a country called anything, in fact. That has to die. And now that's what you have to start asking yourself. Do you imagine us breaking the borders and saying, at least in Africa, that there are no more countries, right? How many countries do we have in Africa? 50, right? Can you imagine that there are no more countries and it's just Africa?
Yeah.
Of course not. Because that, even if that were to happen, that, okay, fine, that has happened. Now we are all just African. We all have one African ID, though, one African passport. Doesn't matter which part of the continent you are living on. But then you might have a job. You guys are artists and stuff like that, and they're calling you out to come to, I don't know, Denmark or Finland to come do a gig or something. Now you need a passport. Now you need an ID now all of a sudden to catch a flight. You know what I mean? Then now so the world would have to stop being the world as we know it. We'd have to cancel the world of nation states, as it were.
Mhm.
And that isn't going to happen. Now, this is just politics. That is not going to happen. You're going to have to tell somebody to some degree to give up being a South African and be an African. And I know a South African, he's not going to just say, yeah, I'm as good as an Angolan. There is no Angola anymore, guys. It's over. Not going to happen.
Okay, I hear you. I think for me, in my perspective, I wouldn't
Mhm,
say that I don't see it happening. I
mhm,
actually wish that it would happen, that Africa becomes one, um, creating a borderless nation. And like
mhm,
that's why I'm even saying like, can we see that vision? Okay, right now we have IDs, we have passports. That's one form of identification that came with the European styles, right? So
mhm,
now, can we, as Africans,
mhm.
understand or also look at what and how we used to identify and somehow give more importance to it so that we can have a form of how we identify ourselves? Like, say, for example, an identity card, but then here it's just stating the four pillars that you mentioned at the beginning, where it's a person's name, their clan names, and then their region that they're from, and then if they have a king that is ruling, then they have that, and that's it. No numbers that we have, like ID numbers, anything else. That is simply how we used to identify. Like, can we see that happen? Like,
It would be a great a dream. But as
yeah.
I say, realistically, um, I'm just thinking. I mean, look, in my research, right? My current
Hmm.
research, I'm thinking yesterday I was speaking to the what do you call him? The head of the migration unit in Johannesburg. Excuse me. Let me some water maybe.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So our conversation anyway was on migration and agency. So how does somebody from, I don't know, from anywhere in Africa, because my mind actually focuses on Southern Africa in particular, my research that is. Um, so the conversation is, how does somebody who comes from, let's say, Zimbabwe into South Africa or Johannesburg, identify them, or not identify, what are the lived experiences, let me put it that way, of somebody from an African country based in Africa? And not that this research topic comes from this, but when I started thinking into like what inspired me to investigate agency within Africa, and investigate the agency of immigrants or migrants, right, or people traveling from other countries living in South Africa, Johannesburg in particular. What was interesting to me when I started thinking deeper in the conversation is how it connected to this German scholar Martin Heidegger. Um, um, what you call his theorizing or research on being and time. So I think it's a book titled Being and Time, where he speaks about, well, let me connect it like this. And then taking Martin Heidegger's idea to the Zimbabwean scholar Chabani Manganyi's um, book, I suppose, or essay titled Being Black in the World, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
connect that to the Watts Prophets, the poetry group. I think they are a trio, spoken word poetry. They have a song called Black in a White Man's World. And then you look at somebody like Tupac, the song um, "White Man's World," right, where he says in the chorus, the lyrics of the chorus is "Born black in this white man's world," right? So you trickle down from Heidegger being in time, so being in the time that you are. What is your being? Who are you right now there? Into being black in the world, into being black in a white world, into being born black into a white world. And then my research then says, well, what is then being black in a, so to speak, black world? What is being an African
Mm.
within Africa? What is being a black person in South Africa? What is particular in my case then in my research? What is being a black migrant or a black African in South Africa? And I look at the cases of Mozambicans, Zimbabweans, and Basotho, people from Lesotho, their lived experiences as Black Africans within the country of South Africa, particularly the city of Johannesburg. So I look at then the post-colonial city, the post-colonial social space, as it were, in Africa, where people come together. So Johannesburg is not just the economic hub of South Africa, it is the central city, if you want to argue that, of Africa itself, right? Um, it is a strong pool. So a lot of people come to South Africa from across the African continent and also from Asia and also from other regions of Europe. So within the African continent or outside of Europe, it's the highest migrant attracting country. So now being black in the world or being black in a white world is obviously clear. We get what that's about. That's got a history that's documented across slavery, across you name any generation or any decade or any era you want of social history. You probably can mention what it meant to being a black or a darker skinned person in a lighter skinned person's world, whatever that means. Um, However, so there's a type of experience then that's associated with blackness within the modern context of the world, which is a typically white world. And that assumes that there's a type of experience associated with being white in the white world. And as much as you probably argue there's an experience associated with being a man, being a black man, to being a Muslim, and all these other areas, but here we're talking race, right? So in that particular instance, you can imagine the Africa we knew, as I mentioned earlier, and the Africa we're having to grapple, well, the world we knew, and now the world we have to identify as Africa in the world that we live in today is what we're trying to deal with here. And trying to form an identity there is shaped around, first and foremost, our nationality. Before anything else, your parents probably teach you a gender, right? And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with this, actually. This is a good thing. It's not a bad thing at all for your parents to teach you how to just be whatever at that foundational level. You just need a little bit of shaping, let's put it that way. They teach you a language, they choose a language. You don't have really a choice, it's what they know. So you learn something we call a mother tongue for a reason, right? Because your mother spoke it to you when you were a child. And you are breastfeeding and she was singing you songs while you were breastfeeding and talking to you while you were breastfeeding. So you heard this voice. She was speaking to you while you were still in the womb. So you heard that voice. Your father, probably, if she was around. In modern Africa, we have a different conversation there. But let's say he was around and he also spoke to your mother through the stomach or through your mother in the stomach, whatever, whatever. So you had a language. So the language carries something important here. It carries a type of civilization. So the language tells you what a certain type of people or how a certain type of people perceived the world, what we referred to when we said the ocean, how we spoke of the ocean, how we spoke of the sky and the stars and food, how we spoke of, procreation, marriage, raising kids, what a kid is, what a boy child is, a girl child, all of these things, you know what I mean? They embedded there in that language itself. And there's nothing wrong here. This is a beautiful thing, in fact. And that's probably the first areas of problems we have. It's starting with that language story, because when the language disappears, the civilization disappears. So when we start saying this language is not good enough, you're saying those people aren't as civilized as they should be or could be, right? So we start trying to want to explain those people's society and lives through the understanding that we have. So we, you know what I mean? We start calling certain groups, for example, I like this particular one, where we say certain groups, for instance, were matriarchal, or certain groups were patriarchal. We say that because that's how we understand the world right now. We will have words for things, and therefore we want to categorize things according to these words. These words are concepts group things into things we can organize. That's why we say it's Black people concept. So we have an idea of an Africa that's borderless, because that's a concept. It's a Pan-African concept. It's an Africa we imagine to have existed before the Africa we're seeing to be failing, in fact. The Africa we're seeing now, we're seeing it towards us problems. So we want to imagine that the Africa of before was better. And there's nothing wrong with that. It probably was. Might have not been, but it probably was. So now we're working with that, and we're trying to imagine how that Africa could have been, because we don't know that Africa. Now, would we be able to go back to that? We probably would have a really tough time. Do I think I like the concept now? Remember, we said this concept. Do I like the concept of a one Africa for all, Pan-Africanist concept, movement, in fact, if you want to use the word movement? Of course. Do I think it's a feasible reality? Politically? No. Why not? It's going to be a war. Why do you know that, Kwezi? Well, there are radical voices that say things like Mabaham, let these people go back home. Why? Because we've defined what home is. What is home, Kwezi? Home is Kenya. What is Kenya? It's my flag. How do you know that? I sing the national anthem. I believe in this movement. My father was born there. My grandmother was born there. This is the border. That's the boundary. I don't wear that flag when the soccer plays. I don't dress in that shirt when the football plays. I don't support that national anthem. This is my country. So we have that issue first and foremost. And now you're talking about not a revolution, or rather a change that might bring an Africa and make it a oneness. You're talking about the destruction of an identity marker, identity category that a lot of people want to hold on to dearly. You're not going to tell Winnie Mandela that she must not be a South African anymore. She believes she's an African. She believed. You're not going to tell Nelson Mandela that he should have stopped being East. He fought and died for it, for crying out loud, he would argue, right? But he is an African. He did this not for South Africa per se, but for Africa holistically, but shaped, because his experiences were within the gates, if you want to use the word gates, like within the fences, if you like the word fence, or the walls, if you like that word, of South Africa. He didn't experience this shit in Ghana. He experienced it right here. So he fought for things that were happening right here. So the idea of him even voting, now think about that. I don't vote, people would say, because I don't give a damn about this government, people would say. But my great uncle got killed for a vote. So now you conflicted there. Do I represent him by keeping the vote thing going on, or do I just say F this crap? I want a one Africa and that's it. And I'm probably gonna say that. Mandela probably would have said Africa for all, right? That's why they had the Pan-African movement. That's why they had the OAU, right? Into now what we call the AU, right? With the Kwame Nkrumahs of the time, Haile Selassie, and everything that trickled down into a liberated Africa that we see today. We had that shit. We believe in it conceptually. We believe in it, in terms of how we probably live our lives. And people like you and I and other people who believe in this oneness and let's travel Africa, let's be one, F these passports, fuck this all, and we should all live like this. We all believe in it. But we see why it probably can't happen anymore. We probably had an opportunity to do that when we started the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, in the 1960s, right? We had the opportunity for that. But the decision by our leaders was that, but what I know is being a Kenyan. Are you going to tell me now I'm actually I'm not a Kenyan, I'm just an African. And there's nothing wrong with just being an African, because that's probably who you really are. but you went and shaped your whole reality around the national anthem, the blood and sweat and tears of your great grandfather, the flag that they stood for, wow, the language you speak. I mean, really. And then you say, this is Kenyan food. We go to that depth. Runa, Reja, this kind of food, most South Africa, this is our South African cuisine. This is a Tswana. We go to that depth. And then, when I tell the Tswanas now that they are no more South Africans, that, because now there's an identity issue we're dealing with. You're saying deconstruct your whole identity. I'm with you, trust me. But I'm giving you the realistic image of probably why it can't happen. Philosophically, it should be happening. Philosophically, that's where we are conceptually. Deconstruct this crap. And this is who we really would be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I just want to open it up to the people who joined us if they have any questions. Because I see
Sure,
you're
sure.
like at 11:30 now. Um, any questions? Any comments? You feel free to unmute yourself and speak, or please write on the chat box.
Oh, there's a chat.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, B. Please use the mic.
Thank you so much, Kwezi, for this conversation. And I think it has brought a reflection I've had for a while full circle, because I was thinking to myself, and I remember sometime back in around in 2018 when I had come out. I think that's the first, I don't want to say the first time really, but that's the first time I really gave a deeper thought to how I feel about identity, mine, but also how I am perceived with regards to identity around people. Because in that moment, I was actively experiencing, losing family because of, you know, picking and choosing and welcoming people into who I am as a person. And then I think the second time that it happened, and I love that this conversation has taken, guys, Brandy, I am on a call. The second one was in 2019 when the we had the Supreme Court ruling with regards to Repeal 162 case in Kenya. Like I was saying, I'm glad this conversation has also taken the shape of identity with regards to identity documents, passports, identity cards, and any other document that you would require to operate within specific, like you said, walls, fences, however boundaries, however you want to look at it. And for me, I think this is that time, it was May 24th, 2019. I think that was the first time that I felt like I've completely detached from what my identity as a Kenyan is, because I felt like, what's the point of having an identity aligning with a state that doesn't align with who I am as a human being? Isn't a state made by human beings? Then why is it that I am not human enough to be part of a state? I'm not human enough to be respected. I'm not human enough to be protected as a queer person. I'm not human enough to enjoy safety. I'm not human enough to live in places where I don't have to worry about how people will perceive me. And then over time, I think the conversation has continuously taken shape up to the time, even when we started the Queer Republic. I think Zawadi will attest to the fact that our biggest vision has always been, how do we build a community of queer people that is not limited by our boundaries, by the countries we come from? That when you say you're a queer person, just because you come from South Africa doesn't mean you have more freedoms than another person. That we fight for a community that we build that doesn't have to fit within the boundaries that have been created, but really to fit within the fact that we align in identifying that all of us are human, and that we are the one who make the world what it is, not the other way around. So recognizing that, and then seeing how that ideology in itself can shape Africa in general. And while we recognize, I love that you asked, Zawadi was asking earlier, do we envision a future where we are free of all of that? I think I've envisioned that a lot. but also recognizing that that's not a thing we can wake up one day and say it's gonna happen. It's gonna take a lot. It's gonna take a lot of denouncing, to be honest. Sometimes to denounce parts that you've only known as you, because then all these parts are shaped by an untrue perception of what our identity is. And so to be able to look at that, to be able to reflect on that, to be able to reflect on all these things that we've spoken about here, but also to be able to think about them from a point where we ask ourselves honestly, are we okay with losing some things that we've known? Are we okay with disintegrating everything entirely? And then we start afresh, and what that would look like. And of course, a lot of people have privilege. A lot of people benefit from the systems we have in place. A lot of people benefit from the borders we have in place. A lot of people, we benefit from the identities we've been socialized to accept as what identity is. And so because these people benefit, it's even harder for these people to let go of that privilege, because who doesn't want privilege? If the world was ever going to be equal, we will all then need that privilege. We would all want to have that privilege, that if we all have privilege, then nobody has to lack anything, because all of us have access to that privilege. But it's because the system is set up intentionally to privilege a few people and let everyone chase the illusion and the imagination of what privilege is. And so because of that, then even when we are thinking of, disintegrating the whole identity that we have, we also have to think and consider, because if we all don't come together, then we might not even be able to achieve that goal. So those are some of the reflections that I was thinking about as the conversation was going on. Thank you.
And it's like really, B, how do you say name? Weaver. Let me see. Like, I think what
B
you're
is
saying,
okay.
first you're touching on like, B is okay. Cool, B. So I mean, while you're talking, and I think even what you guys, you and Zawadi, your vision with even this platform, the Queer Republic, and this vision of an Africa of a sort, right, also deals with two things, right? The probability of that happening versus the possibility. So you have this conversation of probability and possibility. Is it possible that it would happen? Is it probable that it would happen? And you'd first have to maybe, or we would have to first deal with probably that. And then I think the second one you touched on when you said privilege and the system is also important in even dealing with probability and possibility. Why I say that is when you say system, I mean, I remember, well, something I like to delve into when I talk about the system, is to unpack it and call it out for what it is. So when we say the system, what do we actually mean? So I think it starts there, and then we would be able to then address what we're talking about. So for me, technically, actually, anyway, what we mean by that is the modalities and the rules of the structuring entity, essentially, right? So society, as it were, everything in society. Well, I'm going to speak like a sociologist now. Everything in society, or how society works, is in the form of a system, right? So it's got, and by society, I just mean any social structuring entity. I'm gonna get to what I mean by that in a second. It works by having its own rules, society that is, and having its own norms, and it having its own, you can almost say its own constitution, its own 10 commandments, if you want to say it like that, right? And it has its own moral ethic or moral code. So that it's got its system, essentially. Every society or social setting, social field or structuring entity works in a systematic type of like format, right? So what do we mean by society or structuring entity here? Anything or any space that a human being exists within. So the world in itself is this, right? But then to be more precise, the world is quite vague, to say the world. So you say maybe the countries in the world are that, and then you say maybe let's zone down into maybe one country and say South Africa is a country that can be looked at as a society, right? But then like Niklas Luhmann speaks, when he speaks of the society of society. So within the society called the world, there's a society called Africa. and there's a way that Africa works. Then within the African society, there's a society called South Africa. In South African society, there are other societies, and it goes in and in and in and in, and it zones down all the way into maybe the family space, your family, the Smith or the Jacobs or the Molloy family, whatever they might be called, right? The Kardashians become literally a structuring entity. To be a Kardashian, to be a Smith, to be a Molloy means A, B, and C. A good Molloy is B, E, and you know what I mean? A bad one is this when you disgrace the family name, you know, those kind of little things. And then that goes, it grows, right? And then you say, now you're not disgracing the family, you're disgracing the village or the community. Then you're disgracing the clan, perhaps, and then you're disgracing maybe the country. Yo, South Africans are these kind of people. Oh, Nigerians are those kind of people, right? Then we go deeper. We embarrassing or disgracing the continent. Oh, Africans are these kind of people. Oh, Europeans are those kind of people. Essentially, the societies within societies. And all of these societies work in a systematic way, right? So as I'm mentioning, a family could be a structuring entity. As this family, this is how we teach our children, this is how we raise our boys, this is how we raise our girls, this is how we choose the names, this is how the hierarchy, because we belong to this clan, in fact, or this nation, or we are Zulus, or we are Xhosa, or we are Tswanas, this is how we even think about raising our children. This is where we get the blueprint, in other words, of how to raise our children and create, you know, our own society. So, and then even when we go as far as creating communities, right, like an NGO, like an actual community, like the LGBTIQ plus, and you know what I mean? There we start creating a structuring entity. So there's rules. You might not, you know what I mean? There's rules in what is or what is not. Who is not, who's an ally, who's not, who belongs, who does not. There's rules in how we behave. There's Pride Month, there's days that we observe. There's symbols of representation, identity markers like the flag. There's identity performance, like how you dress, like how you speak, how you refer to yourself, right? So all of these are actually structuring entities, and all of these things work like systems. So when you're not doing it this way, you might be looked at funny. When you're doing it that way, you might be looked at like, yeah, that's a real one. You know, that's a real Christian. That's a bad Christian. You know what I'm saying? And then first you're having to deal with that. And then when you talk about privilege, so now that's a structuring entity. Now, within each of these structuring entity, whether it's a family space, whether it's an NGO, whether you belong to an LGBTIQ plus community, whether you're a Kenyan, whether you're South African, whether you're Zulu, whatever you might choose to belong to, all of these are spaces. And as a human being, right? Some scholars who study agency, which is also part of my, I would say I'm doing that, okay. In my research, we argue that agency or the practice of an individual never happens outside of some sort of system or some sort of category or some sort of structuring entity. You're never, ever not part of your family, even if you detest to be part of it. So that already creates something, right? Let's say you're not part of your family, you're in a classroom in class, right? So there you have an assumed identity for that classroom. And then that classroom structures your behavior. So don't speak when the teacher's speaking, for example. Submit your test, so come write the test. When you fail, you get this kind of mark. When you pass, you get that kind of grade. A super grade is that kind of grade, a distinction, you know? In the LGBTIQ plus community, there's certain rules that define that space. So the point I'm trying to make here, where was I? Oh, yes. The privileges of each space. So behaving well in this space has what we call sanctions or types of sanctions, positive ones or negative ones. So rewards, there are perks, there are capitals. Right? When you talk about everything being used in a sense to gain you, you know, something, everything is capital, like Pierre Bourdieu says. So your social capital, your cultural capital, you know, your what you call economic capital, the actual money and actual physical money, right? All of these things add to your privilege. And when you're talking about a capitalist society, when you say the system now, um, um, you're talking about a society or a system that is capitalist off the bat. Any space in society that we live in and that we understand is off the bat maybe a capitalist society. And that's a kind of society that works around things like the privileged versus the non-privileged. The only way the system of capitalism can actually work is that some people benefit and some people don't. Some people are rich and some people are poor. Some people have the money, some people have to work harder for it. And by working harder for it, there's a belief that I'll also get a lot of money. And by creating that belief, you keep the system itself working. So in other words, you're telling somebody to give up the privileges of capitalism would be the first start, right? Give up the privileges of, let's say, what? Hot water in the shower. It's maybe literally at that minute or that acute level. The water will only be on for this much time, or you will only be cold. You know what I'm saying? You will have a heater, no heater, microwave, no microwave. I'm not saying these are the good things, by the way. I'm just saying you're telling people to think about the possibilities of shaping a world, right? Forget the industry stuff I just mentioned, by the way, like the commodities and stuff, but you're saying somebody must give up the privileges of capitalism that positions them in society. So especially the people who have, right? So the people with money, the people with things, the people who benefit from being a South African, in other words, who benefit from being a Kenyan, in other words. You're telling them that we must move away from that. And I think it will start there. Now, what's the possibility and probability of that, of them accepting that? And then let's say there are people like you and I, or in your case, then what you're trying to do is put particularly a community of particularly queer people who particularly want to see Africa as borderless, and that, you know what I mean? There's a very particular type of person you're talking about now, right? And maybe, you know what I'm saying? You're talking about first and foremost somebody who has to believe that we can have this kind of Africa, and then that person also has to accept and be or be an ally to the LGBTIQ or be queer to some degree or be fine. You know what I'm saying? And then more than that, remember, though we don't believe and we want to separate ourselves from Kenya, we can't actually not be in Kenya though. You get what I'm saying? Yes, I can be in South Africa, maybe. Let's say you immigrate, all of us immigrate and live in South Africa. But then now we're in South Africa. Whether we want to detach from South Africa or not is another conversation. But we're in South Africa. We have to now all of a sudden abide by the rules and the norms and the laws of South Africa. And South Africa says that's a crime. That's not a crime. That's wrong. That's not wrong. You don't get water. You get water. You have to abide and actually accept that, because otherwise you actually literally even if you're a stateless person, you're still within the nation state, or as you mentioned, the borders, right? You're still within the fences of the border. It's a tricky one, B. I'm with you. You know what I'm saying, in the sense that I've got the vision too, but it really leaves us with reality versus philosophical, conceptual imagination. Rather, let me put it this way: possibility and probability. If that makes sense. Sorry for the elaborate answers, guys.
Thank you for the elaborate answer.
I think maybe a question I would maybe ask everyone else then who, maybe is thinking about something, or maybe you guys could respond to as well, is um in the shaping of an African identity, or in your imagination rather, of this united Africa, right? And what being part of that Africa would mean, right? It obviously goes way beyond just saying I don't believe in identity documents. I don't believe in this. I don't believe in that. And that's the philosophical things that I mentioned again, because, how would it work? What kind of society do we imagine working? What kind of, I don't know. Yeah, just that, the real deal workings of such a country or such a space. Let's not call it a country. Like, what is job opportunities looking like? You know what I mean? What is movement? What is access to things looking like? And I know we're going to say, no, it's equal for everyone. Everyone can get a bit of this and a bit of that. But then that means something in terms of the system you're talking about. Is it a capitalist system? Is it part of the world economy? Is it trading? You know what I'm saying? Because then we think of Africa like that. Africa as a space can do that, probably can lead the world, dominate the world, and it is what it is. But still within that system where we're trading, for instance, where people are exchanging, there's going to be people who have to speak on your behalf. In other words, there's going to have to be maybe a president or a government. And then there you're talking about people who have the control really of what happens. You're talking about the elite decision makers, the people who shape the rules, who shape the norms of the workings of that system. And what that essentially means that even if the money is coming in and we are trading, you're probably still going to see inequality. You're probably going to still see instances where these people over the other people. You know, you talking about Africa before colonial contact or colonization, right? Before European contact, of course, we had our own space, we had our own dramas, we had wars, right, between nations. We had colonial conquests of certain nations over certain. We had the killing of people. We had all the shit going down before we got or joined the bigger conversation of what we call global politics today, or geopolitics. Um, how would you imagine this Africa working beyond the utopian, beautiful type of experience?
Okay, how I envision it, um, I see it as being an environment where we firstly get to be able to have autonomy. Autonomy in this sense is knowing that we are producing the food that we eat, we are producing and part of the production of the things that we use for our bodies, the products and the clothes that we wear, like being active in creating a life for ourselves first and foremost, and also being in spaces where respect is being one of the pillars of what builds us as a community, and also acceptance more than anything, um, acceptance of difference, of personalities, because I think we live in a world where most of us have to hide who we are or pretend to be someone else in order to be accepted, or we have to live by a certain standard. And that in itself, it creates a whole lot of conflict within a person, because you know who you are, or you're trying to figure out who you are, but then there is so much restrictions, and you're just left with two boxes, you either this or that, and that's it. And I feel like even spiritually, because for me, I feel like we are more guided by spirit before we are guided by flesh. And I feel like in that sense, spirit flows. It's like water. You cannot hold it back. And I feel like we should be in communities where we are able to learn about personalities, about who we are, about emotions, about feelings, in a way that is not judgmental, in a way that is um, we constantly want to learn, and we accept, and also we get to grow from that. It's like seeing trees, and you don't stop a tree from growing. Instead, if it's making other trees not grow, then you find a way for it to adapt, you know. So I feel like if we create a community where we are more open, we are more communal in a sense, like even healing, for example, even understanding problems when we have to deal with problems. We don't just focus on an individual aspect, we focus on the fact that this problem is happening to one person, it can jump to another person. So now we deal with the problem in a collective way instead of an individualistic way. So for me, that's how I envision it. A community where like we are very active in our spiritual growth, our physical growth, our mental growth, financial growth as well, and being like the people that decide on what happens in our lives from the day you wake up, like first thing in the morning when you wake up, and then you know what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, the work that you're going to, like who is actually giving you the work? Are you the one saying, I'm taking all of these instructions from someone else? Do you have an input in the things that you're going to do? Like, because you're putting energy, you're putting your effort, you're putting your thoughts into work, into something that you are making a living out of. So, do you have that much autonomy, that much input, that much voice into creating that life? You know, like your daily living, you being active, you being the co creator of your life, so to speak. So, for me, that's how I envision it. And of course, we're going to have um, so many conflicts. People would find it hard to even let go of what they already know because we are used to habit. And we sometimes, even if something it's not okay or it's not comfortable, we just get used to that. We adapt more easily, and we just say, okay, we cannot do anything about it. It's okay because when we look at the Berlin Conference and colonization, like it took them years to get where we are right now. And it started with a conversation. Like the whole change of the world, them deciding, you know what, we're splitting Africa. We will make sure that these people will follow these rules, and it started with a conversation, you know, and from that conversation, they made plans for it. Did they think it was crazy? Probably, but then they believed in it. And with time, they stick up to whatever it is that they wrote down, whatever it is that they believe, and whatever it is that they decided, and then they made it happen. So I feel like also even for us, I like no matter how crazy it sounds or how unrealistic or how difficult it is, I feel like starting from a conversation and also being in a sense where we all understand and we share these. Of course, it's not going to be smooth. We're going to have conflict. Some people are not going to see it. Some people will disagree. Some people will agree with it. But then just being in a space where we know what we want and we believe in it. And even if we do have doubts, but then if we keep being consistent, and it will grow. It will grow. Like I certainly believe that it will grow. And even if it seems impossible, the more we believe in it, the little that we do with what we have, the change that we do, like from you waking up in the morning and deciding, you know what, I'm going to put my all into creating a garden and making sure that most of the products that I have, I some of them, well, half of them are created by me. That sense of autonomy. From that point, the next thing after a year or two or three, you have a huge company, and there are people that are also working with you to create that lifestyle, to create that form of daily living where you make the decisions, not someone else deciding who you are, how you can be, when and how. Like you are some form of a robot or you have no sense of voice whatsoever, but you get to be the one to do that. So I believe, I honestly wholeheartedly believe that even if it doesn't happen today, but the little that I do today builds up to a full body of what will happen tomorrow and in the next future, in the next generation, that that will honestly happen. And that's how I believe that. And okay, I'm going to check the chat box. Let me start by Laura. Laura says, thank you for this. It has been quite eye-opening to listen to the different perspectives that have been shared today. The realization that I have been rooted in one way of thinking without ever considering any of these other perspectives has been a slightly jarring yet very welcome one. Thank you, Buba, for sharing the link. This was wonderfully insightful. Thank you, Laura. And Joy says, listening to this conversation has me thinking about what kind of Africa I dream of, how unity, peace, and love looks like in my eyes, and the realization of how far we are from achieving it kind of breaks my heart. It's also had me question some of the beliefs I hold, which means I'll need a deeper look into myself. I wonder whether it's hypocritical of me to one hand hate capitalism while using retail therapy to comfort myself on the other hand. Ooh, okay. Also from Joy, I'm also thinking about my identity as a queer woman involved in advocacy and how often I feel like I use my voice to fight for people who don't even consider me a whole human just because of my queerness. Yeah, that's a deep one. Um, the last one from Joy. A united Africa for me is one way I don't have to constantly realize or even be reminded that I am a woman or a queer person. A space where being human is enough. A space where we can all just coexist peacefully, regardless of how one identifies. It's like how you have an arm, but you don't keep reminding that you have an arm. Hmm, I get that. Because it feels like every time I leave the house, something happens that reminds me that I am a woman, and it is seldom a good thing. Okay, I hear you, Joy. Laura responded to Joy. At Joy, I fully relate to what you're saying. The realization that having parents from different countries set me up early to not be rooted in any one country, and thus left me with a sense of no belonging to either country, but rather identifying myself as simply African all this while. And the broader subject of how we all want to identify with something familiar to us, starting from the simplest level, like family or clan, being brought up today has me feeling slightly lost. Ooh, okay. Like there's like a lot of things to unpack, and I wish we had more time to like speak more about them. Yeah, okay. The last one from Rafa is thank you for this wonderful conversation. But I'm starting to wonder if I should be an African because I don't think I even belong there as a queer woman, an activist, and a right holder. Ooh, okay. Like I said, these are very heavy things that
Yeah,
need.
they are, man. You know, and they for me like reading like I forget what was the
Mhm.
person. Let me see. I think it was Laura. It was Laura. That little part there at the end. I like how she brings like the broader subject of how we all want to identify with something familiar to us, starting with the simplest at the simplest level, like family clan, being brought up to this, a bit lost. And I think literally being or the feeling or the you know what I mean the feeling of even identifying within the space already is speaking to that, right? Identifying with something as simple as just a friendship group, just who my friends are, and if we share the kind of interest is already speaking to that point over there, because that's where the socialization comes in with those friends. You have a shared interest, in some instances a shared belief, a shared thing that connects you. In other words, not to say it's true, but what George Holman wants to argue is that every relationship, every connection to a space is due to a social exchange of a sort. So there's something you're getting out of it. Maybe that's not George Holman per se, but generally the exchange aspect of, every action, everything you do, every relationship you forge, there's a benefit of a sort, that's a personal one that speaks to you, So by being part of this particular group or having these particular friends is intentional, is what the argument they're making there. It's an intentional decision because you know what you get out of it. And I think is it Raffle, it speaks to literally that last point where the belonging to Africa, because now when you don't belong, for instance, to Africa in this regard, I don't belong there as a queer woman. You know what I'm saying? It means that maybe Africa, or how could I say, it means that there's a place that you might belong then. Because the question is then where else would you belong? Is the issue Africa as a continent, or is the issue how do I put it? Is the issue perhaps a certain type of experience of Africa as a continent? Do you get what I'm saying? So there's the argument right now, right? Look at South Africa and the 49 refugees, wannabes that are flying, the 49ers that are flying out to the US on some genocide statement, right? They would feel like as white people, we can't be there. We just can't be there as white Afrikaners or white people, period, because of A, B, and C, right? In some regions of the world, people are moving, right? So migration is really, or refugee seeking, asylum seeking is really shaped by the idea of I don't belong there because of A, B, and C. I might, whatever reasons, right? Whatever A, B, and C might be. And for me, man, it's like this, we all grapple with these things. I won't even lie. I ask myself questions of that sort all the time, like who belongs where, who doesn't belong where. I mean, personally, obviously, it's my research and the people I work around. These are the kind of questions that we engage with on a general level. But conversations of belonging, as I say, are still shaped by some systemic understanding of the space that you're in, right? And that space itself. Let me put it this way. We might feel that these Afrikaners might feel that for them, the US is a better social experience and they would be better accepted, better fitting, and less persecuted or attacked or whatever the case might be in the US as opposed to South Africa. And maybe that really becomes the experience of some, but not necessarily the experience of all, right? And there's this need and this strong need to identify with a particular space and to shape ourselves. I mean, with that particular space. Hence why your experience of society won't be just an experience as a woman. It'll be an experience as a queer woman or experience as a queer person. And then it'll be which society do you experience? Because Africa is one thing, right? You can say in Africa, I feel like this, but it could be a specific space within Africa that makes you feel a particular way, right? And then it really boils down into these niche little areas of what I believe should be good. You know what I'm saying? So in as much as like what B mentioned earlier of, for instance, I don't feel Kenyan, I can't belong because Kenya makes me feel like this, you know what I'm saying? Speaks to two conversations, what we call an individual identity, how I feel this is who I am, versus what we call a role identity. So the role you play in a space versus what you call a social identity, how we perceive you or how, you know what I mean? How we name and perceive or understand you in the social space. And to be honest, really the identity of self, what we call the individual identity, is almost the non-existent. That's not the one there is no such thing. In other words, that's an individual identity. We believe it's there because it's how we understand ourselves, but how we understand ourselves is based on the community and society we live in, and et cetera, et cetera. So the social identity essentially, well, maybe the role identity and social identity are where it's at. So what do you do in society? How do you act? How do you perform? What do you perform? How do you act, in other words, or behave? And what do you act as? Maybe you act as a nurse, maybe you are a nurse. So there's certain role that you play in society. And because of the role you play, we have a social identity for you. Oh, so-and-so is a male nurse, a Black male nurse. You know what I mean? And then from there, so starts shaping the identity, right? Oh, I'm a Black male nurse. And then when so-and-so speaks, they say, oh, as a Black male nurse, right? So yes, he is a Black male nurse, but how we get to that personal identity is really shaped by the. So for instance, your queer experience or your queerness would be really determined literally by the society you're brought up in. So I'm not going to mention names. I've read a particular book by, I'm not mentioning names because I know the person and colleague, etc., etc. And they are, they deal literally with this kind of topic of, sexuality studies. So long and short, there's types, even in this regard, of queer experiences and therefore queer identities, the argument could be. So there's another type of, let's say, a South African queer experience, a white South African queer person versus a Black South African queer person, a Black Kenyan South African queer person versus a colored South African queer person, are totally types of African experiences that might mean something totally different, come with certain types of privileges for those people, and come with certain types of constraints personally, or for some of them in some ways or another, and therefore might result in how that person even perceives or goes about living in the world, right? So how you go about expressing yourself, things about coming out and all those kind of things. How do you do it? Do you do it? Where do you do it? Is it even a thing? Is it significant? Does it mean something for you, for your space? All these kind of things come into that experience of the type of person you are based, or rather the type of queer identity, like the type of Black person that exists in South Africa versus the type of Black person that exists in Malawi versus the type of Black person that exists in America, are all three different types of experiences of Blackness. So you don't talk about Blackness, you talk about, or Black identity, you talk about Black identities or queer identities in that regard. You know what I'm saying? So belonging in Africa as a queer woman, for instance, let me see again, was it draft from there? Belonging in Africa as a queer woman, is deeper than just being a queer woman, would be the position here. And you get what I'm saying, right? I think you get what I'm saying. I wanted to see what Joy said. Just okay. There's a lot more in the chat than I thought. Okay.
Okay.
Like what?
Let me go through the chat. I see
Yeah.
B has their hand up. I don't know if the hand has been up, B, or you put it
Oh.
up just now.
This is, of course, the second time after Kwezi asked the question, and I think I wanted to say something briefly about the fact that I think if we really honestly can imagine a world where our identities as we define them and as we experience them precede the systems and all those things that have been created. I think first of all we need to question the whole idea of creating systems that we work for, because a lot of systems we create, we work for. We've created systems where we are saying, oh, we want borders, and then we have to work really hard to uphold those borders. And then we've created systems and we've said everyone must have an ID, and then we work so hard to interfere with people getting that or a passport. I mean, it's just the other day, the report that was released going around about the amount of money Africans lose when they're looking for visas to travel to to Western countries. And nobody questions that. Everyone still wants to look at Africa as a poor continent, for example. But then meanwhile, they're happy to milk Africa to its knees while saying, you're not good enough to come to our country. And so when we start building systems that actually work for us, then what you will realize, and at the risk of sounding like maybe I'm scared to think too big, too far ahead and all that kind of stuff, but I think the realization of it all won't be that we don't need systems. The realization of it all would be realizing that we can create systems actually that work if we wanted to, the willingness to actually say, because I do believe it's like
But
running
work
a
for
home.
everybody, we
Yeah.
can't create systems that work for everybody.
Yeah, I do believe like running a home, you have to decide what you're eating for breakfast, what you're eating for lunch. You're not deciding who should eat, but we've created systems that we work so hard to decide who should eat and who shouldn't. Yet the system really should just revolve around, we are all eating. That's not even up for debate. We are all eating. What are we eating? That's the question. And so when we begin to create systems like that, and I love the reflections that have come on the chat, because then questioning things like, okay, I hate capitalism, but I like doing retail therapy. And then the question becomes, are we saying we want systems that hinder us from doing things that make us happy? No. We are just quite literally saying, why don't we create systems where retail therapy doesn't feel like a guilty thing? Why don't we create systems where being born of parents from different countries, like myself as well, literally doesn't mean feeling like you don't belong here or there. It actually means you belong everywhere, because it gives it, as in it giving you more power than it taking power away from you. Why don't we create systems that whenever we look at each other, the first thing we think about is that they're human, as Joy, I think, has said, because it's more important to see the humanity of a person than it is to begin deciding for yourself what that person is, because then that is what then forces us to create systems that we actually have to work for. So people are working so hard to identify who is gay, who is a lesbian, who is trans, who is, and then now to work even harder to discriminate against this population. But then you do realize you save yourself a lot of time and resources. I save myself a lot of time and resources when that's not the thing we are questioning constantly. That by virtue of being a human being, you are born with the right to actually be here and experience all the pleasures that life come with as part of your human experience. And while that is happening, if at all we have to create systems, we have to create systems that ensures you don't miss out on that, as opposed to creating systems that we work so hard for to make sure you miss out on some of those things. So that's what I was thinking about. And thank you so much. This conversation has been quite an interesting one.
No, true, man. I think B, like what you're touching on, can I just run through them? Like for me, three things you really deal with here. When you mention retail guilt, and create systems whereby retail therapy doesn't feel like guilt afterwards. Well, first and foremost, if we're living in a system called capitalism, that will always be the case, because the system called capitalism means that somebody will be poor. While you're spending $1,000 buying a shoe, somebody needs $5 for a loaf of bread. And you're probably going to walk past that person and say, no, I've got nothing. Or maybe you're going to give them $10 for a loaf of bread. But there you spent $10 on that person. They wanted 5, you gave them 10, and still went and bought a pair of shoes, let's say for 1,000, right? So the guilt might emerge right there. And there you did what you did. The person wanted $5, I gave them $20, I bought myself 5,000 or 1,000 shoes. I shouldn't feel bad. And then maybe you do, let's say you do, let's say you don't. The point is the system that exists though, somebody will always be struggling. You sit at an office, right? I mean, the way I greet every single person when I walk on campus, for instance, the cleaning lady, I want to know them by name. Like, she's not a cleaning lady to me. She is Mrs. So-and-so, that guy's mom, for example, right? So, but then the system means that she has to ask my permission to come into my office to clean my office. This is like somebody who's my mother now, age-wise. But she has to say, excuse me, can I just come in just to clean your bin, please? Can I take your trash for you? You understand me? So the system means she's gonna remain there for many reasons. We can start wherever we wanna start in the way. You can just name a date and I'll tell you how from that point we got to where we are, because that's how it is. It's been going on for as long as you want. You can start in 1500s. I'll tell you how 16, 17, 1800s, 1900s into the apartheid, post-apartheid, you name these genocides, the economic meltdown of 2007, 2008, the results of that, all the way to COVID, all the way to where we find ourselves as we talk today, and how that system, and how the system, in fact, since the French Revolution, right, 1792 now, right, since the Industrial Enlightenment era, the era of illumination, people talk Illuminati, we're talking just the era of the illumination, in the age of reason, the age of science, 1700s, mid 1700s, and we can trace it. We can show you the developments of what happened and how the world changed and how the system that we have today, capitalism, industrialized society, right, global economy, the have and the have-nots, warm water. You're talking about retail therapy. You know what I'm saying? I hate capitalism, but I love me a good cup of coffee. Understand what I mean? I love a good warm bath with a glass of wine, some people might say. And that's capitalism. But can you really, because somebody doesn't have a place to stay while you're having a good, bath. So that's the system we're talking about here. So changing that system means giving up maybe something that's normal to you so that somebody can have literally a loaf of bread, before we get deep into the other political aspects of it, or socio-economic, socio-cultural aspects of it, just a loaf of bread. And the implicated symbolic meaning of that alone, right? So that's the system we're talking about. Retail guilt will always be there unless you don't give a damn about the person who won't have. And as long as I don't mind, I don't care who we vote for, guys. I can promise you right now, unless if the next president, whoever your candidate is, if the system is a capitalist, and now we're living in South Africa, right? Me at least. We're talking about a modern republic. We call it the Republic of South Africa. That's a modern capitalist republic, right? That's a type of country. That means the country lives by, it's a modern capitalist republic. Capitalism is the system. Means somebody is going to sleep on the street tonight. Literally, it means that somebody's not going to have food while somebody's having a pizza. That's what a modern republic, by virtue of it being that. So if we're living in a capitalist society, my sister who said that, I forget, could have been Joy, I forget, but about, retail therapy. I hate capitalism, but I do really do love myself a good cup of coffee. And then B, you mentioned something about, I forget who it was, also mentioned about dual, having parents from different countries, right? So the nationality aspect comes up again. So by different country, you already mean somebody with two, well, the parents have citizenship of different countries. Typically, in most nation states, depending on the political system of that country, accept what we call dual citizenship. So as a point of choosing where to belong, it's a deeper conversation than that. You probably could belong to both. You probably could hold two passports. I know many people personally that have two passports, one Zimbabwean one South African one German one Brazilian one, for example. And they carry them. They take out the passport they take out when they need to. So the one I'm talking about, the person from Germany, I mean, Germany is a very strong passport in international relations, right, in global geopolitics versus a Brazilian passport. But when she's in Brazil, guess what? She takes out the Brazilian passport. Why? Social capital, cultural or national capital. I belong to Brazil. I'm a Brazilian citizen. I'm not a tourist. I belong here. I'm one of you. Look at my ID. It says Brazil. When she's in Germany or anywhere else in the world for that matter, when she's visiting South Africa, she's taking out that German passport. You'll only know she's Brazilian or at least half Brazilian when she tells you that. And the only half aspect of this anyway is because we have nation states. Somebody can have a parent from, I know people, I'm sure we all do, somebody's mother's from Zimbabwe, his father from South Africa. What do you do there? But then why I was saying it's deeper than just that national one is that now your father's, let's say, is from South Africa, and he's not just a South African, he's a Tswana South African. That's now even deeper. It's not just belonging to South Africa alone. Now you have to ask yourself about Tswana culture. Do you even know that? And you can say, no, I don't care about that. But really the deep rootedness of why you even have that person as a father is because there is a Tswana nation. You get what I'm saying? So you might not care, it might be meaningless, it might be pointless, in fact, for many people, but it's there though, for you, it's your piece of history. And if that piece of history doesn't place, like, when you're building a picture, you're building your life project, and there are puzzles, pieces of puzzles, one of them is that piece of Tswana-ness that you maybe see as meaningless. You get what I'm saying? But so you're not doing, I mean, so one of them could be the South African piece, but then you get in South Africa, you go to Tswana, and then you find out really what's going on there. Why did your father even go as far as traveling or meeting your mother in another place in the world and having you, for instance, you know what I mean? And that speaks to the history of both of them. On both sides, you can ask such a question. So you don't only belong, it's not a question of where you belong, it's how deep do you want to belong to those spaces? How deep do you want to know about that history? And even where it meets itself. Because that's important. I'm telling you right now, that is important history for Africa, not just for yourself. You know what I'm saying? Because it's a testament to that it is one Africa, right? So to be able to see that my, for instance, Tswana father and my, I don't know, mom who's Ndau from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and my Ndau mother and my Tswana father, that's a deep historical situation in Africa that would be interesting to explore. Then the working systems, do we create systems that work? Well, the systems will work for who they should work for. It depends who creates the system. And as far as how will they work, they'll work for who they need to work for. Some people won't benefit from the system, period. Like, it's impossible. Even if we built this kind of Africa that we're thinking about, we had it and it was there, it's established, everyone is equal, all this blah, blah stuff, this cool stuff. You know what I'm saying? The system has to still be shaped by some rules. And maybe those rules don't discriminate as far as we can say that, but there will be somebody's voice that has to be dominated. It doesn't have to be, but it will be, right? Because we all can't speak at the same time. Chances are we're probably going to select a leader, somebody who we believe can represent us. And guess what? As soon as we do that, we're back in the system of what we understand right now. So then it shapes itself like that. Yeah, man. Without rambling too much, let me leave it there. Oh, it was the point from the last one from Joy again, that last little bit. It makes it harder for queer relationships to be recognized because there's still this notion that a family must have father, mother, and kids. While I know that queer people can adopt, there's literally so much red tape that it's almost impossible for. Let's say that wasn't the case, Joy. Let's say it wasn't red tape. Let's leave the politics out of it. You know what will happen as soon as let's say just leave. I mean, I see where you're at. The notion of family should be nuclear. There should be mom, dad, 2 kids, a house, a dog, 1 cat, 1 car, mom, dad, work. The nuclear idea of a family, as it were. And then there's this idea of alternative families, right? Where families are different. There's no parents. There's adopted families. There's queer couples. There's queer couples who adopt. There's surrogacy, etc., etc., etc. But all of that still goes back to a type of relationship. And as soon as it becomes a type of relationship, it's a systematic, structured idea. So it can't, you get what I'm saying? It's a queer, as you say it right there, queer relationship. Now that's a type of relationship. And there's something called a non-queer relationship, and that's a type of relationship. You get what I'm saying? So yes, there might be conflicts in society as to which one is, that particular society might have issues with a type of family or a type of relationship or a type of group of people or a type of gang or a type of race, etc., etc. That might be a particular society, right? Nonetheless, though, it is a society with its own way of being. In as much as the queer space, the queer relationships are their own type of relationship with their own way of being. I think the real question is, how do we just live a world where we don't look at people from Zimbabwe as Zimbabweans? We don't look at people that, let's say, in the queer conversation that identify as gay, we don't look at them as gays, right? We don't look at, et cetera, et cetera. You get where I'm coming from. We don't look at things in that sort of categoric way of understanding them. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. I think we are way over time, and this conversation, I feel like it should continue. Well, these type of conversations. I always emphasize that a lot of change just came with simply talking, and there's so much power in that. There's so much realization that comes from just having a normal conversation. Um,
I think what Joy says at the end, the dream for us to live in a world where we don't have the different categories we
so,
live
and
in.
I am so sorry. I think we should really close the session down.
No,
Yes, I
Mm.
think we should close the chat. Thank you so much, everybody, for
Mhm.
coming through. I think we will definitely put more um, time into having these conversations, these through the human connection to act up. Am I audible? Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great, because my connection was acting up there for a bit. Thank you so much for joining the session.
All right,
Thank you
cool.
so much. And I feel like everything is so it's so intersectional, and like there's one thing to mention, but then it brings a whole lot of other things that need to be discussed and also looked at, unpacked, and all of those things. But I truly appreciate you coming through to have this conversation, and also everyone that joined. Thank you so much. We will definitely have more conversations like this, because I feel like we are at a space where we are just surviving with what we have, and there's this deep need to create a world where we are able to live how we feel from the depths of our heart and our spirit, to just live. So I feel like we will definitely continue having these conversations, and also seeing how we can create that world that we want, because more than anything, we are the builders of that. We are the creators, we are the co-creators of our lives, and we can definitely do it. Even if we feel scared, we probably don't see it clearly, but honestly, we every step, no matter how small it is, and even the thought, your heart saying, this is how I want to live, like, just listen to it. And as much as you can, please live it. Live it, because it knows why and how it wants to live. So please give love to yourself, give warmth. Yes, Africa right now is very tricky and very hard for queer people to live, but I feel like we will get there, and we will get to a point where even you having to say I'm a queer person, having to disclaim that to people, it won't be necessary anymore, because you'll be accepted. You as a human being, a full being, you will be loved, seen, respected, and heard more than anything. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Kwezi, yet again. And I hope you have a beautiful day. Kwezi, anything else you want to close with? Please feel free.
Well, no, like, thanks, I guess, for for the invite. It was interesting. I mean, yeah, to say the least, right? We could do it again sometime soon. Do it again next
Yes,
year. Let's do it on Africa Day and invite some, make a panel situation. But nonetheless, that's another chat. I wanted to say, just maybe in closing on my end, to maybe to build on that last bit by Joy, that the dream is to not exist in these categories, and like you're saying, Zoe, not having to at some stage, or not having to keep disclosing that, oh, by the way, I've come out, oh, by the way, I'm queer, you know, um, because that is also the our issue, right? That's why we find ourselves in these difficult situations, because we feel like we can only understand ourselves through categoric discussions of ourselves, and the only way that dream would be achievable, Joy, is for us to start really stepping away from grouping ourselves and saying this is who we are in terms of a category, because then it traps us in that, and we have to realize and live by that definition, so to speak. You know what I mean? So, but anyways, I look forward to the next one, and thanks for having me. It was interesting and nice. I thought our our videos are gonna be on, but hey, it's all good.
yeah. Thank you so much. And also, please reach out if you need anything on your research. We would be happy to engage in any way, in any form. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a beautiful, beautiful afternoon. And till next time.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks and bye.